Hello, my name is Amy, and this is the Glow Up podcast. Today, my guest is Petrina with Homegrown Florida, and we're going to be talking about starting seeds and permaculture. But before that, we're going to be reviewing what January was like, the weather, our harvest challenges, and then we'll jump into our topics for today. So, Petrina, how was the weather? First, well, maybe first, why don't we tell people what zone you're in,
Oh, okay.
so that we context.
I think that's a great way to start, and especially
Yeah.
with the new planting zones, right? So I was impacted by the new planting zone. I
Okay.
was a 9A,
Mm-hmm.
and I am now a 9B, which really wasn't that big of a difference for me because honestly, I was on that border. I always had the
Okay.
winters like 9A and the summers like 9B. That was my microclimate.
Yes.
So I am in 9B. I'm in the west central portion of Florida, so up about an hour north of Tampa.
Okay.
Weather for us, it has not been typical this January.
Okay.
So our weather usually has like 2 or 3 frosts, but not like long frosts, just a couple nights down
Right.
into the high 20s, upper 30s, something like that. Enough to kill your tomatoes, but not enough to kill your broccoli.
Got it.
This year, though, I haven't had one frost. There was this last one that came through that was supposed to be a pretty significant frost. It never dropped below 34. I still have tomato plants. I didn't cover them or anything, and that is unusual for us. But it's been a pleasant surprise because I grew winter squash for like a really long period of time. My tomatoes have been just producing in this
Oh,
weather.
that's wonderful.
It's pretty crazy. I'm not used to that. I'm used to having to hurry up, rush, get those tomatoes done before the frost, pick them
Right.
green and set them
Hmm.
over in the window and let them ripen up. Well, this year they're just growing, and having tomatoes grow with no pests is like a whole new experience for me.
So I'll tell you, I actually personally don't really care for tomatoes, and they attract
Oh,
so many pests
you're
to my
the
garden.
only one.
I know. I'm the only one that's like, I'll just pass because they attract so many
They
pests.
do. They do.
And you have to be so on top. I remember one time I was growing tomatoes and I left for a weekend, so like a Friday and Saturday night. And just from being gone from that weekend, when I came back, they were decimated. And I was like, this isn't worth it. Like I was like, I think I had like one tomato that year, but I was like, left to my own device, I wouldn't even at the grocery store, I don't really like buy tomatoes. So I was like, this isn't worth it. But I'm so glad you're having a wonderful harvest.
I'm the epitome of my Italian background, and like tomatoes are like
Yes.
part of our normal food in this
Mm-hmm.
house, whether it's sauce or salsas or whatever. We
Yes.
eat a ton of tomatoes, so I am always trying to find the one or the variety that produces the most, produces the fastest, and the ones that I can grow before that summer hits when those bugs really get bad. After that I don't mess with them.
You know what? I will say I might have tried growing them during the summer, and that might have been one of the
Oh,
factors in
that'll do
the
it.
yeah. Yeah, you know what? And I should have done it this year. And I guess I still have time. There's really
You
no
do.
reason to not try. But I should
Absolutely.
have done it this year more than anything just to know, is it a summer issue or a year-round issue? I might
You got
still I
that.
might still do it. Now
That's
now that we're
absolutely
talking
right.
about it.
I always tell people when I talk to them on my channel, like, if they've struggled with something, I'm like, have you tried a different variety? Have you
Yeah.
tried to grow it in a different season? Because
Yes.
that's really going to make a difference. And I think where you're at, what zone are you?
I'm in zone 11. So I was also
Oh,
impacted by the zone
yeah.
change. I used to be 10B. Now I'm zone 11. Uh Things feel the same, like in terms of like
Yeah.
what you're doing. But I think with climate change and just like the regular impacts we're going to be seeing, I think this is, everything's getting a little bit hotter. And so, we have the zone change. Um, but
Yeah, you can
I
grow
mean,
those tomatoes all through winter. You can start them late
yeah.
fall and just keep going all through.
Yes. So going back to the frost, I will tell you the truth. I don't prepare for the frost at all because we get warned. And when I had first started gardening, I would hear about the frost and be like, oh my gosh. And I would bring every plant I owned inside the house. And then and I was like, nothing's really happening. The frost never really comes to us. And so I will say, if you are truly in South Florida, I would say figure out what your like what your risk tolerance is, because for me,
Yeah.
what ever since I started gardening, once I started leaving things outside, I think last year we actually did get some frost, and one of my banana trees stuff, like you could just tell, like, oh wow, that looks totally different than it did a week ago.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's thriving. Like, it was just like for a month or so, it didn't look so nice, but that is the only plant that I think has ever been impacted by frost. And for me personally, it's not worth being where we are. It's not worth the work. I'm willing to sacrifice one or two plants to be like, but I didn't do anything, like I didn't have to
Well,
prepare. I didn't have to run around, like everything. For
yeah,
me,
that's fine.
yeah.
That's me too. Even though I'm a bit north of you and
Hmm.
I get regular frost, last year we had 2 days in a row where it got down to 26 degrees for several hours. And during the day, it didn't rise above 40. And that really hurt a lot of plants. I took out all my tomatoes.
Oh, wow.
But I don't even cover anymore. I don't do the covering. The only thing I protect is bananas. And I have
Really?
I have a Java de Cava and a banana, and I keep
Uh-huh.
them in pots because I know
Okay.
where I'm at. They don't like that. They just don't like anything below 40, and we get regular below 40. So
Okay.
I do have them in pots, and I'll just take them from their little spot by the pool and move them a little bit closer to the house because the ambient heat from the house usually handles it.
Oh,
But
that's
that's
a
the
great
extent.
tip. Okay.
That is the extent of what I do.
That makes a lot of sense. I would bring all of mine in the house. It never occurred to me, like, if I just like put them all together in the patio, they'll be fine.
Yeah, they'll
Um,
create a windbreak. They'll also get the
yeah,
heat from the house. Yeah, it usually is good enough. And
that's a
like you
great tip.
said, they might look like crap for a month.
Yeah, but that's fine.
They'll be fine. Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of long-term productivity, they'll be fine. So for
Right.
me, it's just not worth the work of setting up
Yeah.
to be like, oh, and like at least with you, the frost actually gets there. With us,
Yeah.
the frost doesn't, they'll warn us, but then it never even gets here. So you're like, you did all this work and the
For
weather didn't
nothing.
even reach you. Yeah, like it's
Right.
my risk tolerance. I'm way more willing to sacrifice one plant every few years to this idea than to like do all the work.
I'll sacrifice a lot more. I'll sacrifice 50% because I'm like, I'll just put new plants in when they're gone.
Yeah, and if you're seed starting, you have a
Yes.
constant generation of
We're going to
you know.
talk all about that.
Yes,
We're going to talk all about
exactly.
that. Backups and everything. I love seed
Mhm.
starting.
Here, the weather has been really overcast. So
Yes.
I've been doing a seed starting series where I've learned a lot, and I will address that, I think, maybe like towards the summer, about like the ideas I started with when I started the series and what I've learned through the series. But one of the things that I'm facing right now is that because the weather is so overcast, that heat that I'm so accustomed to, like, oh, the heat will be there. It's no big deal. The heat, the sun isn't there. So a lot of things aren't germinating the way I'm accustomed to. I was getting close to 100% like germination rates with all my plants, and I barely had to think about it. It'd be like,
Right.
plant a few and whatever, they'll be there. And right now I'm planting things and they are struggling to germinate. And what I'm chalking it up to is the heat, because it's been so overcast that they're just really not getting the sun or the heat that they're accustomed to. So I've been seeing a real just slow down in the germination. So I don't know if it's been overcast like that around you or if you've been experiencing something similar.
Yeah. So we have had so much rain this season, and came with that was a lot of
Mm.
overcast, a
Yes.
lot of clouds, a lot of dark days for multiple days, which is not normal for our winters. This is an odd winter for me, at least, in my experience.
Hmm.
And the overcast has caused stunting of plants. So even my full grown plants, they slow down because if they're not
Okay.
getting all of that sun for that
Right.
photosynthesis and stuff, they will not really push. Now they'll catch up, right? They
Hmm.
will catch up, but they do slow down. Germination takes longer. Don't give up on them though. That's like the big thing that I tell people when they
Yeah.
seed start. If you start some and like, 3 pop up out of your 10, don't assume that the remaining 7 are never going to pop up. they could still pop up. Some of them are stragglers, or what I like to call
Oh
runts.
yeah. Yeah.
They come a little bit later, and then just randomly you're going to see this little, I mean, you're going to have plants this big, and then randomly you're just going to have this little seedling pop up, and you're like, what are you?
Mm-hmm.
And you got to remember, those are where
Yep.
I put those seeds. Yeah.
Yep. I'm with you. I know some people are like, oh, this plant isn't perfect, compost it. I'm very like, no, put it in the ground. You'd be surprised at how resilient a lot of these plants are. And I've
Yep.
planted things that look dead. And even if they do not do well this year, in a year later, you'll be like, what plant is that? And it's like, oh, it's that thing you put in the ground. Like it took it a while, but now it's popped back up. And to me, if you've taken the time and the effort, maybe spent the money on a plant, like all these things end up either you bought a plant or you put the time and the money into growing a seed. So to me, it's always worth it. I'm with you.
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, what are you losing by just letting that plant have a little bit more time and space? Most of the time, they're going to do one of two things, right? They're going to completely die, and you'll see that happen pretty quickly, or they're going to sit there and just kind of stagnate along for a
Yeah.
period of time, and then all of a sudden they're going to hit the season that they like, and then they're just going to burst forth with this happiness, and they're going to
Yes.
grow, and you're going to be like, how did that happen? Seeds know. They don't need us, right? They know when to come up. The plant knows when it's supposed to be doing well. It knows what season it likes to grow in, what temperatures it likes. So really, you're just kind of the facilitator of, where they're going to go. And
Right.
then they dictate, how they're going to grow. And you're just there for the ride.
Absolutely. How have your harvests been?
Well, like I said,
Harvest or challenges?
tomatoes.
Oh, yes. That's
Yeah.
right. We talked about the
So,
tomatoes.
lots of tomatoes. And surprisingly, I always expected that if I got less frost and I got less cold, those deep cold temperatures for
I know.
Florida.
You're kind of in that
That
mid-range though, where
I am.
I would guess that you would probably experience some like truly tropical weather and then sometimes like really temperate weather where you're like just kind of in
Yeah.
that middle and having to like figure
It
it
is.
out. Yeah.
It's a middle ground, and you really
Yeah.
have to understand the seasons where I'm at, because there isn't any there's no leeway sometimes. We can't grow certain things in summer and we can't grow certain things in winter. So we have a fall and a spring that are pretty
Right.
short that you got to try
Oh,
to get
that
those
makes
things going.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you have okay. I hadn't considered it like that. If
Yeah.
where
There's
we
some
are,
overlap,
you
but
right.
yeah.
Where we are, you start planting in fall and then you cut it off in spring, and you wouldn't really do any gardening over the summer. But I can certainly garden through the winter. That's not a problem. But it makes
Yeah.
sense what you're saying. I hadn't considered that.
Right, because of the frost that I get, and I get so
Mm-hmm.
many, there is, certain plants that are just not going to hold up in winter for me, and that's any of those warm season crops, the squashes, the tomatoes, corn, anything like that. They're just not going to hold up. But the cool season crops, your kales, all your brassicas, your carrots, your onions, your garlic, those will hold up and they can handle the frost. They're going to look like crap if they get hit with it, but
Yeah.
they'll still produce like
Yeah.
crazy. And one of the things that surprised me about this season was that since I didn't get all of those really deep cold temperatures, I was really concerned with those cold weather crops that I always have challenges with because of where we live is warm. So Brussels sprouts, celery, long season, light cold weather, I was like, man, they're going to have a hard time. And they are just cruising right along. They're as happy as can be. They're really enjoying the fact that it's just kind of an even temperature. It's not like huge swings.
That's great.
They've been really happy. The broccoli, the cauliflower. I grew a purple cauliflower this year. I am so proud of it. It is so pretty.
Oh, I saw it. It was really pretty. Yeah.
It's so
Go to
pretty.
her Instagram. It's beautiful.
Yes. It's probably the most beautiful thing I've ever grown, and I'm obsessed with it. But
Yes, good. I'm glad.
challenge-wise,
Yeah.
okay, because I didn't get my frost,
Mhm.
because I haven't gotten those deep temperatures that I'm used to, I have some fruit trees, probably some trees that you can't grow where you're at because they require chill hours. So
Mhm.
my peach tree, my plum tree,
Yeah, that's not gonna happen. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So I have some of those trees, and I
That's
have
awesome.
special ones that the University of Florida has designed for low chill hours, including all my berries, my blueberries and my blackberries. They're all designed for low chill hours, so they don't need a lot of hours, but they need somewhere between 150 and 200 hours.
Okay.
250. Yeah. And for me, normally I can hit 200 no problem. This
Hmm.
year, I'm going to be borderline with hitting the 150, which means,
Oh, wow.
yeah, the problem with that is my trees might flower and not produce fruit for this year, which will
Okay.
be,
Yeah,
not
of
so
course.
great.
Right.
The other problem with such mild weather that we've had is that my trees are blooming and they're not supposed to be blooming yet. They're supposed to be dormant and they have
Right.
failed to go into a complete dormancy. So that can sometimes affect the production that they're going to have. And I've mainly been having that with my peach tree. All the berries seem to have got the picture and they're they're down, they're dormant. But the peach tree is not going fully dormant. It's still putting off a flower here and there. So I'm very, I don't know if it's a challenge yet, but I'm interested to know that a more mild winter, what is it going to be like when it comes to fruit production in spring?
I'm interested to see what happens because for I can't count on that, so I have absolutely no plans that require that. So, so that's like one of the things that if you're truly in South Florida, everything she just said won't work for us. And I don't
Mhm.
think that I can't even think of like a plant that people recommend that we put in the ground that would do something like that.
No,
So
mostly what you guys grow in South Florida is the tropicals, and I can grow some
right,
tropicals, right?
yeah.
I can grow my bananas and my
Hmm.
jaboticabas in pots. I can't put them in the ground because they can't handle the cold that I get here.
Right. So you have to be able. So for anybody listening, the significance of that is she has to be able to move them around. So if she puts
Right.
them in the ground and she can't dig them up, when the
Mm,
cold weather hits, yeah. So that would be if you're wondering why she's saying keeping them in pots. That would be why.
right. But it does give me an opportunity to grow some things that, folks in South Florida can't
Right.
grow, right? We all have our own cool things we can grow. So I think a lot of the times, a lot of gardeners will focus on, I can't grow rhubarb or
Hmm.
I can't grow apples, even though there's a couple that you can grow in the northern part of the state. They focus on the one or two or three plants that are just like, nah, unfortunately, it's just not going to work here. But Florida is crazy in terms of the fruit that we can grow here. And I mean
Yes.
fruit that you cannot find at the grocery store. Some really cool stuff. I've got two mulberry trees out there. I don't find mulberries in the grocery store.
No.
You know what I
Never.
mean? There's lychees, there's loquats, there's all kinds. I have a Indian sherbet berry, a tropical tree. It's they're really cool. They're called sherbet berries because they taste kind of like sherbet and they have
That's so
different
cool.
colored berries. Yeah, they're so good. But all of these cool, never before heard of, fruit trees that we can grow in
Hmm.
all different parts of the state. And depending on whether you're in South or Central or North, it's going to depend on which one you can grow. A lot of people think that you can only grow avocados in South Florida, but there are a handful of cold tolerant avocados that I can grow up here, no problem, because they can
Oh,
handle
that's
down to about
awesome.
25 degrees. So as
That's
long as
good to
I
know.
can, maybe protect them a little bit for the first couple of years, they'll be fine after that. But you really got to kind of step out of that what you can't grow and think about what you can grow, which is a
Yes.
lot. It's a
And
lot.
also knowing, understanding that Florida is such a big place
Hmm.
and we run, and not just big east, like running east and west,
Right.
we're so long running north and south, which is actually more impactful for determining what you can grow.
Yes.
So that's really important to know that, wherever you are, it's really going to impact, like, you really have to look to local gardeners. You really have to look to those around you and see what works
Yeah.
historically to figure out what makes sense. Because if you're just going, like we were talking about, by temperate type of opinions, or what do you call them, best practices,
Hmm.
that's not always going to work. But then if you did solely tropical best practices, that's not always going to work. So you really do have to look around and see what works. I love mulberries, And I didn't even realize. I think when I
So
started,
good.
so good. When I started gardening, it was just kind of like one of those things people were talking about. And I was like, okay, buy a plant, put it over there. And now we're like, this is one of our favorite trees in the backyard. My kids go and pluck them without even like talking to me about it. I mean, they don't need
It's a
to talk to
great
me about it.
snack.
Yeah. And they just like sit there and like, oh yeah, their swings are right next to it. So they just like they play on
So
their swings,
cute.
they pick a few and like eat it and keep going. And I'm like, oh, that's so nice. I'm so
That's
glad like we've
adorable.
cultivated this for them. Yeah.
Yes, that and you know, this is going to stick with them. They're going to remember eating out of the backyard. You know, it's going
Mm-hmm.
to change their relationship with food. I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
But mulberries are like one of I just put it on my Instagram the other day. Easiest fruit I think I've ever grown is mulberry. Fruits super, super fast. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you can prune that thing however
That's
you
true.
want, and you can grow them in North Florida. I think you can grow them in the Georgias and the Alabamas and all that other stuff. You can really grow these trees through many different, all the way from South Florida. You know, you're talking tropical to semi-tropical to temperate. You know, you can grow these through
Yeah.
a wide range.
And I think it took mine about a year to start fruiting. And then once it did, I don't think there's a season where it actually really stops. There are seasons where it does better.
Right.
But I haven't measured it, but just kind of like thinking through the seasons, I don't think it's ever really stopped. Like mango trees have a mango season, you know, and you can't count
Yep.
on having even if it's just one or two, you cannot count on having a mango year round. But the mulberry tree, like I think year round, like
Yeah.
okay, there's gonna be a few berries that are doing okay. And if you've never tried one, it tastes like maybe a cross between a strawberry and a raspberry, but it definitely has that like berry flavor.
It's very much
Yeah.
for me, it's like a blackberry. I very much feel like it's like a super sweet blackberry, not the kind that you
Mhm.
get in the store where they're kinda
Like the
sour.
tart ones, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, like, this is like a really super sweet blackberry, but
Yes.
I love the texture of them too, they're so good.
Yes.
You'll stain your hands though, so be
It
aware.
will. And your my stains my teeth.
Everything.
Yeah. My greens right now are doing amazing, and that's what I love. Once I started understanding vegetable gardening and what I'd realistically be able to get out of a South Florida vegetable garden, that is my favorite, and just the ability to like, hey, the salad that goes with tonight's dinner, like, comes direct from the garden. That it's like my favorite time of year and everything is doing great. So I've been having big harvests of basil, lettuces, what do you Swiss chard. And
Mm,
so just a lot of the greens that kind of like keep the household going. Those have been
yeah,
awesome. The spring onions, obviously, those are
right,
easy.
and they grow all year round, they do great.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are fantastic. And then the one that's given me a challenge recently is the cilantro. So the cilantro is growing, but I'm seeing a lot of what I would call like fungus on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I've just kind of been like discarding it, but it's so weird because there's so much of it, but you're like, "Ah, but I can't really eat it. Like there's fungus on
Well,
it." So
so number one, cilantro is like one of those vegetables that or herbs, I guess, that you
right.
can grow in Florida. However, it's challenging, right? It goes to seed very, very quickly. It has all
Mhm.
kinds of problems. It's just like a diva in the garden, you know? It really
Okay.
is.
Good to know. I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to
But
know.
have you heard of culantro?
Yes, yes, and I'm dying to put that in the garden.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm not a cilantro eater because I'm
Okay, I
one of those
understand.
people that,
Yeah.
like, I think it tastes like soap.
So, yep.
It's like a genetic thing I hear. But
Yeah, that's what I've heard too.
so we go with parsley whenever cilantro is required. But cilantro, I have heard that culantro, it's spelled basically the same, but
Mhm.
it's CU instead. It is a little bit more tolerant to our tropical weather, and it holds up better, from a taste, what I've heard, because I don't eat it, but what I've heard is it's actually a little bit stronger than regular cilantro, so it has a little bit stronger of a
Mm.
taste than regular cilantro, but in most cases, people say that they can use it one for one, and, it's a great replacement.
I love cilantro, so that doesn't The idea that
Yeah.
it's stronger is fine for me, but if you don't like cilantro, that's worth knowing.
I was going to say, like, you're either on one side of the camp or
Yeah,
the other. I've almost never heard somebody say, yeah, it's all right. They're always like, I love it.
right.
Or it's like me. I'm like, tastes like soap. Nope.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so would you like to start talking about seed starting or permaculture?
Yes. Let's talk seed starting
Okay,
because I am such a geek with seed starting.
that's wonderful because I've been doing a seed starting series, so I've been like
I
dipping my
know.
toes in this water.
That's awesome. I think it's
Hmm.
great. And so the first thing I want to kind of put out there about seed starting is if you are a brand new gardener, brand new, you got your first little plant, you put it in, maybe wait a season or two before you get into the seed starting thing. Get some confidence with growing a plant and seeing what that whole life cycle is like, and the pests and the fungal issues and all those things before you jump into the seed starting ring, because I feel like that first 2 seasons when you're a brand new gardener, you're learning so much. It's like crazy how much that you're learning just from growing this one little tiny plant, right? Seed starting is the same thing, right? There is this whole learning curve that you're doing. Do you start them indoor? Do you start them outdoor? What do you start them in? Soil, water, hydroponic systems? Like, then you've got to get into, what varieties of seeds and, their origins. And I mean, you can make it
Hmm.
about as complicated or as simple as you want, but it is a really big learning curve. So I always tell folks on my channel that, if you're brand new, start with those transplants. They're great. They're going to get you through understanding what it's like for a plant to go through its entire life cycle. And when you're ready and you feel pretty comfortable that you're ready to take on a big new learning opportunity, that's when you want to get into seed startings. And I kind of focus my seed starting into like 5 areas. I'm a
Okay.
numbers girl, like,
Yeah.
number 5.
Yeah. I
I
like
have
that.
to break it up. This is my old career in IT. You have to break it up into phases.
Yes.
um, so first and foremost, whenever you're going to start seeds, you really got to think about what you're starting them in. Potting soil, garden soil, soil in your backyard, um, not your best choices. Not that it's impossible. I actually did an experiment where I started with like 3 different kinds of soil, some from the
Oh,
backyard,
that's very
some from,
cool.
yeah, from a bagged soil mix, and then seed starting
Yeah.
mix. And I kind of found, that there are some differences with them. So seed starting mix is really, really great because it's soft and it's fluffy and it's sterile. You're not
Hmm.
introducing any kind of pests, bugs, soil, fungal issues. Nothing is in it. So it's very sterile. The downside is the plant grows and it, needs fertilizer after a certain point. And sometimes people aren't super familiar with how to apply fertilizer to seedlings and things like that. And so they can burn them or they can not do it enough. And then the
Right.
plant kind of putters out.
Hmm.
So that's a benefit of seed starting in a seed starting mix. The potting or the bag soil mix, the problem with those typically is you get those little sticks. You've seen them, right? They're like
Yes.
little wood chips and stuff.
Hmm.
These little like lettuce seedlings that you were talking about, those little lettuce seedlings are so spindly. And when they come up and they hit
Yeah.
one of those little wood pieces, they give up. They're like, quick, I'm done.
Yeah.
Never mind. So you have to be aware to kind of pick those pieces out. But I found, and this is like bonus tip right now, right? I found like what I think is the best thing to start with seed starting, especially for beginners in soil. I just did another experiment on what kind of soil to use in your green stock, and I tested out these 3 different soils, and one of the soils was called ProMix. It's in
Okay.
this like weird compressed block. It almost looks like a huge block of coconut core or peat moss or
Oh, I know
something.
exactly what you're talking about. Okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So the cool thing about it is it comes with, organic fertilizers already in it, but it's soft and fluffy like the kind you want from a seed starting mix. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. You're getting this, soft, fluffy mix that your little lettuce seedling just pops right out of, but
Right.
you're also like getting some fertilizer in that soil so that you're not having to, be really diligent about,
Hmm.
feeding them with a liquid fertilizer. I think it's still good to do that, but it has enough fertilizer in the soil to probably get your plants through completion, at least into transplant. So little hot tip there.
That is a
that
hot
that
tip. Yeah.
ProMix stuff really is great for seed starting, and you can use it as soil. Like you can use
Okay.
it as both. You don't have to have two different things. And that's what
Right.
I love about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Same.
So that's probably like my first big thing is make sure you know what you're growing in, because
Okay.
that's going to be one of the bigger challenges. Whether you do it in soil blocks or trays or egg cartons, none of that matters, right? Just as long as it has about that much space, that's all they
Right.
really need. They're most of them are tiny. But that kind of leads into the next one, right? Seed depth. So when I
Mm-hmm.
first started seed starting, I was like, why is my germination rate like 10%? It was.
Oh, okay.
It was terrible. For some reason, I had it in my mind that that seed needed to go right in the middle of that seed cell tray,
Mm-hmm.
at least an inch down. Didn't
Right.
matter what kind of seed it was, had to go an inch down. I was wrong for many, many months. And I've kind of now learned that however that big that seed is how deep you plant it. So if that
Right.
little tiny lettuce seed is, like 1/16 of an inch,
Yep.
you just lay that little baby on top and you just sprinkle a
And it'll
tiny
be
bit of
fine.
soil. It'll be
Yeah.
fine. But if you have a bean seed that is like a quarter to a half or a quarter or 3/4 to an inch big, like those big kidney beans, that needs to go down an inch. It needs to go down
Mm-hmm.
as big as it is. And that was a trick that I learned. Most gardeners that I have heard from plant too deeply. So if
Okay.
you feel like you're planting too shallow, you're probably not. You need to probably even go a little more shallow.
Yes. That's something that I had picked up mostly because of flower seeds. Because with flower
Mm.
seeds, they always tell you, because flower seeds are typically very small, not all flowers, but if you're thinking about like salvias, snapdragons, pentas, they're you can almost barely see
Minuscule.
them. Like, yeah,
Right.
minuscule. And they always tell you like just like lay them on the dirt and like tap them in, but so I had kind of picked that up, but it was just from the experience with flower seeds that you have to it's exactly what you're talking about. You have to be conscious about these types of things, that not all seeds need kind of that depth, and in fact for some plants that's not going to work at all. So i
Right.
i know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, I mean, like carrot, when you get into the vegetable world, carrots and radishes live in that same world that, like, the flower seeds do. I
Hmm.
think probably one of the differences there that I'm learning, because I'm not a big flower gardener, but I've gotten into it more recently, and it's a whole nother ball game for me. Flowers, there's a lot of them that require light to germinate,
Hmm.
but there's very few vegetables that require light to germinate. So that is one bigger difference. So putting them on the surface allows them to get some of that light. The hard
Right.
part, keeping that surface moist enough so that
and,
they stay
and that when you water it, it doesn't like wipe away the seed. Like
wash away. Yeah.
you have to be very gentle
Yeah.
with flower seeds particularly.
Yeah. Yeah. Super gentle. Same
Hmm.
thing with like carrot seeds and onion seeds or radish seeds. They're all super, super tiny.
Hmm.
Um, and if you take like a big watering can and they're just
Yep.
going to float around,
Right.
and you have no control anymore over where those land, and then you end up thinning a lot, which is
Yes.
nobody's favorite thing to do ever.
No.
We hate killing baby plants.
If you don't have to, let's not.
Yeah, try not to kill baby plants.
Yeah.
I am ruthless. I was out there just yesterday thinning some carrots because I did get them a little too close, and I was sitting there clipping them, and I'm thinking to
Mhm.
myself, like, my audience is probably going to be like, Petrina, you're killing them all. I'm like, whatever, they're out, they're done.
Well, remember I was saying like I will give anything a chance. What I will do with little seedlings is I will gently remove them and then
Yes,
plant them somewhere else. And it's not guaranteed that they'll grow. Like when they're little, they really are very delicate. And
yes,
sometimes that process is a little too shocking for a seedling, but sometimes they're fine. And to
yeah,
me, it's like, yeah, we already went through the process of germinating this thing and doing all the work. So like I said, to me, I'm like, I'm gonna
give them a
transplant it.
shot.
Yeah, give them a
Yeah.
shot. And if they make it, great. And if they don't, that's okay. Like
You'll know within a couple of days.
yeah,
It will be really obvious within a couple of days whether they made that or not. It's not a
absolutely.
long-term investment there.
Yes.
So yeah, definitely see that.
I have a
Um,
question for you.
sure.
Um, so Down here, you would start seeds typically. Let's say you're starting seeds in the fall. It's hot. It's just after summer.
Mhm.
You start seeds in indirect sunlight. You
Yes.
wouldn't put them out in the sun, and then little by little you bring them out.
Right.
For you, do you do that, or do you start them inside? Where do you start seeds?
So I have a kind of three-phase approach of how I do seeds. And nobody has to follow this way,
Hmm.
but it at least gives some ideas as to what are some different ways to do it, right? So the traditional one is I start them in trays. I personally start probably about 75% of my seeds outside. I
Okay.
almost, I mean, very small amount that I start indoors, if at all. You know what I mean? Like there's
Hmm.
whole varieties that never see the light of the inside of my house ever.
Right.
Because here in Florida, even if you're in North Florida, you can really grow seeds outside,
Hmm.
little seedlings, perfectly fine. Now, when you're starting the seedlings, I have will depend like how I do them. So when you're talking about if I'm starting seeds for summer, because I do some summer gardening,
Okay.
um, starting seeds during the summer or that early fall period when it is still super, super hot, I start almost exclusively in shade, complete shade.
Yeah.
And they stay in almost exclusively complete shade. The only thing that I do is I kind of scoot them to the
Right.
left. So I have one spot on my patio that is completely shaded all day long. And then
Yep.
they slowly just start to creep to the left where they get like an hour of sun and
I
then they
do
get
the
like
exact same thing.
3 hours.
Yes.
They just kind of slowly scoot over.
Yeah.
But during the winter, early spring, the time that we're in right now, I start them in full sun. It,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
they don't
That's what we
even
were
they don't
talking about.
even care. They don't mind at all. They hold their moisture really well. The sun isn't super intense. So I find that this time of year is like the easiest time to start seeds outside.
Hmm.
But when you're in summer, you do got to baby them a little bit more. But if you give them lots and lots of shade, and only start to pull them into that sun when they have germinated and sprouted, when they popped up, and start to pull them in, you're going to have a lot more success. But you
Yeah.
do have to pay attention to sun because sun with seedlings are it's so critical, right? If you're growing inside, right? If you're starting them inside, you probably have some sort of light. You got to get that light like super close,
Hmm.
and it's you got to put a fan on them. It's all way too dramatic for me. It's like way too much work. But when you're outside, you can just put
Yeah.
them in a couple hours of sun and they do really, really well. They actually
Hmm.
hold up really well. And if they die off, you know that you're dealing with one of the seedlings that weren't really super strong.
Hmm.
So you're getting the best of the best. These are the ones that popped up in not the perfect condition. There's the ones that are growing even in intense sun or hot weather or swings in temperatures, and they're doing great. That means you're probably going to end up with a plant that is going to be pretty successful. So it's kind of like the
Battle of
boot
the fittest.
camp.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the boot camp for seeds, starting them
Yeah.
outside. No,
Survival of the fittest, not battle of the fittest. Excuse me.
I knew where you were at. I
Yeah.
knew where you were going.
I said it and I was like, that doesn't sound quite right.
You were almost there.
Yeah.
I do start some indoors though, right? So
Okay.
indoor, I have an arrow garden. This is my
Hmm.
little like trick. Okay. So whenever I have a seed that just has not wanted to germinate for me, and the ones that stand out the most to me are sweet peppers, right? I can get a hot
Mm.
pepper to grow all day long. Sweet peppers, those things just do not want to germinate for me. I have tried every trick in the book. I've tried every season that there is. They will, but the germination rate is terrible.
That's
So
so
what I
strange.
do,
Okay.
yeah, I don't know what it is. They just don't like me, maybe. I'm not sure. So what I do is actually arrow garden. I'm a really big fan of the arrow gardens. They have these
Hmm.
little seed starting trays. They're just like a extra accessory that you can buy, and you pop the tray out and you put the new one in. And instead of having six, you have
Hmm.
23 pods that you can start. So I will pop that tray in and start all of my sweet pepper seeds. And within about
Nice.
3 to 4 weeks, every single one of them will germinate. And then I just transplant them out of the
Right.
arrow garden into the
Right.
garden. That is my trick for those ones that are hard, that are difficult, that challenge
Okay.
me.
I want to comment real quick about the sweet peppers. So if I'm surprised that they give you a hard time about germinating, because for me they germinate, but sweet peppers are not, they do not do well in South Florida. So if you're planting them in South Florida, just know it's going to be risky. Like, you might plant 6, and if one survives, much less gives fruit, you're lucky. I planted some this year as an experiment, and they all germinated. Germinating wasn't a problem, but the second I transplanted them out into the raised beds, they got overcome by scale and just immediately like, you know, just like as the transplant immediately had to be taken out, because I was like, I don't want this like spreading into the rest of my plants, especially when I knew it was a risky venture to begin with. So I have heard that in other, like in if you're a little bit further north, sweet peppers, from what I've heard, will do fine. But if you're looking at sweet peppers specifically in South Florida, I would just make sure your expectations are low.
Have you tried, I have a couple friends that live in South Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Have you tried like different varieties? Because I've heard like El Duce and
Ají dulce.
Cubanellas.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, you can say it. I can't
Yes.
say it.
It's
I
fine.
mispronounce everything.
I did plant them this year, and they are doing well, but they when you look at them, they are obviously a different variety than like your traditional sweet pepper.
Oh yeah, you're not going to get bell
Yeah.
peppers down there. You're
Oh
not doing
no.
bell peppers
Yeah,
down there.
exactly. Sorry. So maybe I meant bell peppers, not sweet peppers. But yes, so the ají dulce is doing well, and I am getting those, and they are coming out in quantity. So I'm thinking that in the future I will stick to that, and maybe like similar varieties.
Right.
But bell peppers, I don't think are going to happen here.
I had a wonderful viewer on my channel. She was from Puerto Rico, and she
Mhm.
sent me I told her I only love sweet peppers, but I struggle with growing them. I can grow hot peppers
Right.
all day, even though
Yes.
we're not really a spicy eater here. And she, such a lovely human being, sent me like 16 different varieties of peppers from Puerto Rico that grow in hot
Mm.
climates.
You're
And
going to
I've
have to
been
pass
growing
those
all
names
of them.
along.
Oh yes, they're all in Spanish, so I'm gonna mispronounce them,
Yeah.
but I'll show you the packet.
Yes.
um, she's such a sweet person. Anyway, so she sent me all of these, and
That's
I
so
started all
nice.
of them, and I'm like, they're all doing so well. So there is varieties out there that will grow, not your traditional California
Right.
Wonder. I can't even grow the California Wonder bell pepper. I mean, it does
You
okay.
can't. Oh,
It's
okay. That's
just
good to
it
know.
does all right. But it kind
Yeah.
so what I grow instead is I like to grow cubanellas. So I believe that originates from Cuba. So cubanellas have a similar look and taste to
Mhm.
a bell pepper. You're not
Mhm.
gonna. I don't think you're gonna get those color varieties that you want, like those pretty purples and stuff like that.
I love those.
But
Those are so beautiful.
I know they're so pretty. But a
Yeah.
cubanella will eventually turn red, I believe. So
Mhm.
you can
I
do a
think
red.
so. Yeah.
But a cubanella is a really great
Yes.
option as a
That's
bell
very true.
pepper that
Mhm.
grows really well down here, and it's sweeter. It's not super hot. I've also been able to grow pimentos. So let me tell you about pimentos, because the pimento peppers, they grow super slow. Like they look all sad and pathetic for the first like 2 months of their
Okay.
life, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden they like burst. They're like that ugly duckling,
Some
nursery
plants
rhyme
do
that
that.
here's a
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the pimentos did that, and they were the sweetest pepper I have ever eaten in my life. So while they looked terrible when they were young,
Mhm.
they burst forth and gave so much after that. I just love those little ones, but just fair warning, they look awful in the beginning.
I'll definitely try. I love those, and that's a great point, because I mean, you could replace a sweet pepper with a pimento and that would work perfectly. I've also heard that shishitos do
Oh yeah.
will do well in our climate. I just haven't had the chance to try those, but I think those are two varieties that I could certainly try, and I
Yeah.
think they'd work.
I'll send you a list of the
Yes.
sweet peppers that that
That would be great.
wonderful lady sent me. I
Yes.
might have to take a picture and send it to you. You'll be able to teach me how to pronounce it. But they're doing so beautifully. I think maybe the other thing that I'd throw out there, especially when it comes to sweet peppers, is we think a lot about growing hot peppers like during the summer because they can
Mhm.
handle it. But
Right.
sweet peppers are a little bit more like tomatoes to me. Even though they're like the same thing, they're hot peppers and sweet peppers are the same plant. For some reason, I feel like the sweet peppers can't handle summer like the hot
No,
peppers
yeah.
can. So if
Sorry.
you can grow them like more in the season of tomatoes,
Right.
it's a better experience for them.
Got it.
Yeah.
So
But sorry, we got off seed starting. I could talk about peppers for forever, honestly. One thing I wanted to mention when it came to seed starting, this is like the number one thing I see people do that have challenges with starting from seed. And probably the number one thing that people get most frustrated with is leggy seedlings. Have you heard of this?
yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
So leggy seedlings, and I did it for years before I realized how much light these seedlings actually need. So if people are watching this for the first time and they don't know what leggy seedlings is, it's just a seedling that's really stretching, and they get
Yeah.
like super tall and they get really thin, and then eventually they kind of fall over and die.
Yep.
And I think we underestimate a lot of the times how much light and sun these little delicate tiny plants need, because they actually need quite a bit. You'd be really, really surprised. And you'd be even more surprised at how much they can handle even during the summer. You're slowly scooting
Yeah.
them into the light, and eventually they are in full sun, and they can
Yeah.
handle it when they're little like that.
I think one of the things that you've touched on like a little bit throughout the whole thing, and I remember this was a huge learning curve for me, was understanding microclimate.
Mm,
And if you are not, I think whenever we talk about climate, the advice is very geared towards temperate weather. So I think when you're growing up and you hear about climate, everything sound like the advice, like everything you've learned has to do with temperate weather. And then if you ever get into the garden and start gardening and you're in a tropical area, you're like, why isn't this working?
yes.
And on top of that, even once you figure that out, understanding microclimate is a really big deal, and saying, okay, plants on the front side of my house are going to do totally different than plants on the back side of my house. And I
Hmm.
have to understand why that's happening. Um, is a huge, huge learning curve. And then when you throw delicate seedlings into the mix, it's another big learning curve. So I would say we should probably talk about that separately one day, but I think a lot of what we're referring to are microclimates, and that's fundamentally hard. Um,
Well, do you mind if we jump right into permaculture? Because I feel
yeah,
like
yes,
talking about microclimate kind of really feeds
yes,
into this permaculture
let's do it.
conversation, right?
That means we're doing a good job.
Yes. So microclimates, right? We use, or permaculture, right? We use these big words, and for new gardeners, they're probably like, this is a huge, big, complicated concept.
Hmm.
And in some ways, it kind of is. There is a learning curve, just like the learning curve of growing a plant for the first time or seed starting for the first time. This microclimate permaculture concept is another round of learning, right? You're just moving through your phases, right? You're going from
Hmm.
kindergarten to middle
Right,
school to high school to
right.
college, and when we talk about microclimates, you can actually make your own microclimate using permaculture practices, right?
Hmm. Yes.
So, say for example, you are like where I
This
was,
is an
right? You have
advanced degree, by the way. We just
what's
talked
that?
about this is like getting an advanced degree. So we
Oh
just
yeah,
went from
yeah.
kindergarten to elementary to middle school, and
You're in
now we're getting our
college.
doctorates. Yeah.
Yeah,
Create your
you're
own
way into your
microclimate.
yeah, you're way into that. So don't
Yeah.
start there if you're brand new. Don't start there. But you can create your own microclimate, right? You
Hmm.
can, if you're starting like what I was in my backyard at my old house when I was first starting gardening, it was just grass. There wasn't a
Hmm.
tree in sight. There was no shade. There was no nothing. It was just straight grass, which I think a lot of viewers have, right? They have this
Yeah.
typical Florida backyard that's just straight
The
grass. And if you get
HOA
into
kind of vibe.
the
Yeah.
HOA stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you get into the older neighborhoods, in my new house, we kind of moved into a little bit of an older neighborhood. We have like more of these mature
Yep.
trees, and you have this like shadowing, and you have the shade, and that really, really
Hmm.
affects the microclimate.
Hmm.
So permaculture, in its basic principle, is having mutually beneficial synergies or systems or something. It's basically saying that you're going to plant things around each other that can benefit each other. And so one of the concepts of permaculture is the 7-story food forest, right? Now, I don't grow personally a food forest, but I know lots of people are interested in it. But I think that the concepts within the 7 stories is you can use those in just a regular annual backyard garden. So
Mhm.
when you talk about the 7 stories, right, you start with the overstory. That's your big trees, right?
Right.
You might get something like a southern live oak, which is a native tree to Florida. It's very big, it's very
Mhm.
huge, casts lots of shadow. Or you might get something like a full-grown peach tree, a pecan tree. These are your really, really big trees. Not
Mhm.
all of us in subdivisions and
Right.
in the city even have the
Right.
ability to grow those large trees. But if you do, it's a great what they call overstory to have.
Mhm.
Then you have your understory trees. These are your smaller trees. You have your bananas and you have your, you know,
Mulberries.
your mulberries, right? Or you have a peach tree that's on a dwarf rootstock, so it's only going to get so big.
Mhm.
Or you got chaya, or you got moringa. You have all
Mhm.
these different kinds of trees. And some of it's for food, some of it's for vitamins, some of it's for herbs, some of it is simply as a chop and drop, or you can use them as both, right? Banana can be a fruit that you use, or you can take the banana after it's produced and chop up that,
Yep.
banana and chop it up and lay it down and let it be fertilizer for your garden. So now you have this overstory tree and these understory trees, and they're helping each other. It's giving it a little
Mhm.
shade, and this one's feeding that one. You know what I mean? It's like this
Mhm.
mutual beneficial system. And then underneath that, you have your shrubs. Pigeon peas is a really great example because
Mm.
that's going to feed the soil and it's not going to take
Yes.
things away. Another type, you've got your berry plants, your blackberries, your blueberries, those kinds of things, the bushy plants. Then underneath that, you have the herbaceous, which is going to be like your herbs, your rosemaries, or, uh,
Mhm.
just a bushy herb plant, maybe some green onions, things like that. Then you go a layer under that, and you're talking the vine layer, which I really love. So you can do
Yes.
anything from a fruit like a passion vine or a kiwi
Mhm.
to like a native plant like a corky stem passion vine or a coral honeysuckle, which brings in great pollinators and good healthy pests that are going to bring down the pest population of the bad pests.
Mhm.
Or you can do a vegetable, chayote squash, great perennial vining plant. And what they're going to do is they're going to crawl along the bush and they're going to
Yep.
crawl along the understory and the overstory, and they're going to use that trees and those plants to grow up while at the same time it might be providing benefits to the soil or giving that plant a little more shade. Then you get down to the bottom layers, and what you're talking about are cover crops and root crops, right? Your cover crops are your strawberries. Maybe you're doing clover, which is a really cool cover crop that helps feed the soil. It's also protecting the soil. It's becoming a living green
Yep.
mulch. So everything is getting that water retention holding in. And then you got your root crops like your sweet potatoes or
Yeah. I have those
taro.
right now. Yeah.
I love sweet potatoes. I can't
Yeah.
right now, they won't do good for me in this weather. But anyway, you have all these layers, but
Mhm.
each one of those layers is benefiting one of the other layers, one of the other plants in the layer. So one of them might be bringing in pollinators, one of them might be pushing out bad pests, one of them might be bringing in bad pests as a trap
Right.
plant, might be adding mulch, one might be adding shade. So when you think about your backyard garden, start creating some of that. So if you have absolutely zero shade, but you don't want to grow a southern live oak that's going to get like 40 feet tall, maybe you know what I mean?
That's a
Like
big
maybe
commitment. Yeah.
it's a big
Yeah.
commitment. That's a lot. I get it.
Yeah.
But maybe you could just put in like a mulberry tree that's going to provide some.
Mhm.
Or one of my
Mango
favorites,
trees.
mango trees. I can't grow those up here, which is really like one of
Really?
my favorite fruits. Yeah, I've killed like 3 or 4 of them now.
Oh,
I
no.
can't grow
I
them.
I'm sorry. I would have assumed see, that's why this is so good. I would have assumed that mango trees were a Florida-wide thing. I would have assumed that.
No.
Okay. I didn't
No,
realize.
North Florida, and I mean, there might be a couple, varieties that are really
Right.
cold hardy, but I haven't found them yet. I've gotten some
Okay.
cold hardy ones, put them in up here. They don't make it ever. Even
Mm,
covered. I'll cover them and everything, and they don't make it
right.
for me. And it could be my microclimate too. So don't rule it out completely.
Right.
But I think if you're in North Florida, I think you kind of do have to rule it out,
Okay.
unfortunately. But sorry, I lost my train of thought. We were
We were talking
mutually
about large.
beneficial.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you can't put in a southern live oak, right? Maybe
Hmm.
you can put in a banana patch, right? It's not really a tree, but you could put in a banana patch that
Right.
creates shade. But my personal favorite, if you want shade and like a complete just straight grass, is a fire bush. My friend turned me onto this. A fire bush is native. It attracts
Yes.
birds. It attracts pollinators, bees. It attracts everything, to be honest with you.
Yep.
And it grows so super fast and so big, and it's pretty. It's just pretty. But and it grows in this like fashion that's not like just straight up like a tree. It kind of grows in this like big bush that becomes like a tree,
Hmm.
and it creates immediate shade in 1 year. You know what I mean? In 1 year, you've created shade pockets. So put that on the west side of your garden and get yourself protection
Hmm.
from the sun in the
Right.
afternoon. That is a type of permaculture right there. Just by picking that you want to put in a native plant that's going to add pollinators, that you can cut down and use it as mulch and it'll grow back, and that's going to provide that shade, you are establishing permaculture in your backyard because you're using this mutually beneficial system of a plant helping another plant do
Hmm.
better. Does that make
Yes.
sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I I love when I first started gardening, I thought everything I did was going to be permaculture. And then I realized like just as a new gardener, I needed to like understand things better. But I thought I would just like plant things and the plants would love me and they would just like never. I also think I thought I would never need
So
to do
sweet.
maintenance. Yeah, I thought
Yeah.
like no, you put them in the ground and then nature takes over, and
Right,
just
right.
like and sometimes that, and once you
Sometimes that
get
is,
better
yeah.
at it, yeah. But my intentions at first were to do permaculture, but then once I started understanding a lot, I personally had to go the raised bed route because I had two large dogs and I'm okay with them trampling my flower beds, but if you're trying to grow vegetables to, like, oh, okay, we want to grow greens so that we can have them with dinner, and your dogs are constantly trampling them, that is not conducive.
Doesn't work out too
Yeah.
well.
So I did have to go the raised bed route, but I am considering starting to go more the permaculture route because, for instance, I grow Salanova lettuce. It's one of my favorite lettuces.
Love that one. Oh
Yes.
my God, you are my twin. I
Yeah.
love Salanova.
It's just sweet and it's crunchy and it's the best lettuce you
Lovely.
can ever have. Yes. And we're so lucky to have it, I think. It's wonderful. I also think they're gorgeous. And when I look at them, I'm like, this belongs in a flower bed. Like they are just that pretty. And so that for permaculture is something that I will be looking at more closely now. So if you go through my garden, I do actually have a few guilds set up. So a guild is a term sometimes used with permaculture that implies that like in this island you have set up one of these systems, right? Where everything is working together in order to produce for humans. Um
Right.
so I do have a few of them set up, but I don't think I've done a very good job of like putting in like, okay, some things are going to be for the prettiness factor. You want to put in some flowers, the fire bush, like you were saying, and then introducing the vegetables. Just because when I was developing the garden, I had the dogs and I had the kids, and you're like, and you have to like divide everything. But now, as time has evolved and I've become a better gardener, I'm like, I think I want to start marrying these things so that things look nice together. So
Well,
I'm going to
yeah,
be
I mean,
moving
even
in that direction.
even so, even like we think of it like it'll look pretty, right? But there's benefits to pretty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty brings
Yep.
in pollinators, right? Pretty might attract pests and they become like trap plants, you know what I mean? And then
Yep.
once you got a trap plant full of aphids, then you have ladybugs that start laying all their babies around there so that they can eat all the aphids. And then you create this like natural system that is just taking
Yes.
care of itself. But if you miss one of those pieces, whether it's, you know, a plant that's going to feed the ground, or a plant that's going to provide shade, or a plant that's going to help retain water in the soil, or a plant that's going to encourage pests or discourage pests. If you miss one of those, you are kind of missing out on the full benefits of that permaculture approach in those. But I got to challenge you, because I believe that you can do permaculture in raised beds. So you can,
Oh,
not
that's
to
a
the
great
full
idea.
extent, not to the full extent, but
Right.
you can
Yeah.
have like even a perennial bed where you mix in
Yes.
some of those smaller layers, right? The root layer, the vine layer, the cover crop layer, and even have like a fire bush on the outside of it so that it's growing to create the shade, maybe some pine, some, you know, bananas off in the distance. You know what I mean? Like you can
Mm-hmm.
still create that permaculture approach, even if you're not doing the whole thing, right? A lot of the times in this world, we think you got to do 100%. I've seen
Right.
a lot of this. Like if you're not
Yeah.
doing, I mean, somebody got on me the other day because they were like, your cardboard has ink on it, so you're not organic. And I'm like, okay, look, we do 80%
Yeah.
around here, guys.
Right.
I'm an
And
80/20 type of girl.
I am too. And I think that's absolutely valid because I think, like as these things go on, we're learning, and like nobody starts knowing everything all at once. And
Absolutely.
so I'm with you because I know I've made that mistake. We didn't used to talk about the ink in the cardboard. And so you'd be like, oh, I have cardboard, I'll go do it. And then
Works.
all these years later, you find out and you're like, okay, now I
Yeah,
know, and now I'll do better. But if you're gonna be like,
moving
well,
on.
that's not organic, be like, okay, it's not. Like I've still put a lot of time and effort, and I still do think that a lot of what we do is going to yield good results.
Right.
It's good for the environment, it's good for us. At the end of the day, we know a lot more about what went into this plant than we know about what we got in the grocery store. So it's still
Right.
that much better for you.
So
But
every percentage towards that
right.
goal of just having a cleaner environment, having food with more nutrition, right? Because you're not waiting weeks to get it in your house.
Yeah.
Just all not having pesticides, not having herbicides, nothing synthetic.
Right.
Like all of those things are leading us down a path where our food is more nutritious and it's better for the environment. Like, so I think every step we make towards that is beneficial. I don't think we need to beat ourselves up because, 2 years ago I put cardboard that had
I
ink
know.
on it,
Yeah.
is what
I
it
know.
is, right?
Yeah. And I've gotten better, but like when you're first starting, everything is so new that I just don't think
Mhm.
you need that pressure. But like
You don't.
I remember when I first started, we were talking about like laying out the cardboard. I wouldn't take like the tape off. And now I go through the effort because I've seen how like it really doesn't break down and it's just
It
kind of
doesn't.
plastic.
It will
Yeah,
eventually work its way up.
right. So as time has gone on, I've started taking those steps, but my garden is also a lot more established than it once was. So the garden itself, it's taking care of itself. So I can put more time and energy into those details that once it just wasn't that realistic to,
Right.
do everything at 100%, like you're saying.
You can't go from kindergarten to your PhD, right?
Right.
There's steps in between, and it's all a
Yeah.
learning process. And part of the journey of the learning is even more fun for me. I don't know, I'm a geek, but I'm kind of a nerd. The learning process is actually more fun for me than actually getting to this end result, right? And I think the concept of permaculture isn't to be 100% perfect. The concept of permaculture is to get better and better and better, not just for feeding ourselves, but also feeding the wildlife, feeding the soil, doing things in a sustainable way so that we're not like, pumping out all the water out of our aquifers to water our garden. Maybe
Right.
we're collecting rainwater. There's a lot of things that you can do that you can contribute towards your journey in permaculture that doesn't necessarily mean you need to do 100% what every book says. Just start down a path, make one,
Yeah.
just like they say with dieting, right? Make one change
Right.
a month or so, and then keep making a little changes over time, and by the time you look back, you're going to be like, wow, look how much I've done. And yeah, and
I
you'll tell because it tastes different, because your food tastes better.
yeah. I think what you were talking about, the learning process, and it's funny that you mentioned that. When I started gardening, I think it was actually the learning process that got me kind of addicted to it, because what I did was, when I had my daughter, and I was like, oh, I need like a house project. So what I did was I tore out all my landscaping, and I was like, oh, I'll just work on the landscaping, because we did not have nice landscaping. We live in an HOA. It kind of stood out. So I was like, I'll work on the landscaping while I have my daughter. And I was like, and then I'll have like a little project that I can pick up and put down like as the baby allows. And then I was so bad at it. Everything I put in died. And I was like, well,
Oh,
now I have no landscaping, and I got to figure this out. So, like, the process of having to figure out like the front yard and the landscaping actually got me really like, why didn't this work? And like the constant process of figuring out like what is going on, why is, I think, one of the ways that I really got into this and started figuring it out, and why eventually it does feel a lot more intuitive, because once you've been there, and we were kind of talking about the seeds, like, well, once you've started so many seeds, you kind of just like know, you don't even know
second
how,
nature.
and you're
Yeah.
just like, I don't know why, but it works like this, it's
If
very
you've
intuitive.
if you've ever made a recipe that you make every single time, right? I have a sourdough bread
Hmm.
recipe that I absolutely love. It's memorized. Like I don't need to look at a
Hmm.
book. I don't need to look at the ingredient list. I know exactly how many grams of everything. I've made it so many times, right? So that's what seed starting becomes. That's what
Yeah.
gardening eventually becomes. But I feel
Yep.
like there's always the cool thing for me about gardening is you never stop learning. Like even after I've been doing it for 6 years now, I still have failures. And
Hmm.
sometimes I chalk that up to, hey, weather wasn't cooperating with me, or, maybe I didn't pick the right variety, or maybe I did something wrong, like I
Right.
overwatered it, which is like something I totally do. Um, but you're always learning something. You're always learning. And for me, well, I don't want to say I've never, but there's very few things in life that I've found that you can spend an entire lifetime doing and still learn something every day. And I feel like gardening is one of those.
Yes.
It's just one of those things that there's just too many plants you could grow. You can't grow
Right.
every plant in every, so you can always learn about new plants. You can always
Yeah.
learn about new concepts and permaculture and seed starting. And there's always these new concepts of how to build soil. Like, oh, girl, I could talk all day. Maybe we'll have to do this sometimes, but I could talk all day about soil health. And
Really.
I always tell people, like, I know soil isn't sexy, but give me a minute. I can make it sexy.
Yeah, but it's, I agree with you. Let's not go off on that tangent, but I
Yeah.
agree with you in that it is, I compost, and it was one of the building blocks to understanding the garden.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll
Yes.
leave it
And
at
well, I was gonna
that.
say you
Yeah.
can bring it into permaculture because
Yeah, of
the
course.
another part of permaculture is the closed loop design, meaning that
Yeah.
you don't have to participate anymore. Once you establish it, you don't have
Right.
to participate. Well, composting in place, chop and drop, or even true composting, like in a tumbler
Hmm.
or in a space, all of that is part of that whole permaculture closed loop design where the plants are providing the materials to create compost. And yeah, number one thing I ever did for my garden was compost. And it was one of probably the very first permaculture concepts that I put into play. And it's I haven't told anybody this. So just for these viewers, I was scared to use my compost at first.
Really?
It had so many bugs in it. I was like,
Yeah, yeah. I see
I
what you're
was
saying. Yeah.
I was like, "I'm gonna lay this down and they're all gonna get infected." Like, I was so sure that, like, laying compost down, like, it was gonna introduce some sort of disease or, like, some total infestation because
Yeah.
it just didn't look like the bagged soil in the store. And when I finally just braved it and I'm like, "I'm just putting it down." Those plants in that bed
The first
did
time you do it, it's amazing. Yeah.
miraculous. It's
Yeah.
kind of like eating it's kind of like eating a peas from the store in a can
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
eating peas fresh in the garden. You're like, these aren't the same
No,
vegetables.
they're not
It's the same
right.
thing, right? Like with soil, you're like, bagged soil is not the same thing as compost. Homemade compost is like a whole
Yeah,
nother level.
it is.
Yeah.
And for the listeners, the life, so life, which also comes in the form of insects, is the benefit of compost, because it essentially makes the soil, I don't want to say it makes the soil alive, but like all that life in the soil feeds the plant and is
Yeah.
beneficial for the plant. So if you're seeing insects, that's not a bad thing. That
It's a
means,
good thing. It's
right,
a
it
really
means
good
that
thing.
everything is breaking down and kind of doing what it's supposed to do. Um, when I had first started gardening, I did compost just made sense to me. When you start gardening, some things are just going to make sense. And I was
They
like,
click.
you know
Yeah.
what? I would take my kitchen scraps and just like throw it around the base of a plant. I was like, I don't know why, but I know this is going to be fine. And so,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
think about it in nature, right? I always
Yeah.
try to go back to this. This is what clicks for me, right? So you said that, that clicked for you. The thing that
Yeah.
clicks for me is if I wasn't around and this plant was growing naturally, the fruit and the vegetables and the leaves and everything are just going to drop off
Mhm.
and fall around the plant anyway. So it works in nature.
What you had mentioned it before, one of my favorite plants for the garden is the banana tree, because they
Really
are
great.
so incredibly useful. Because so one, I've gotten very used to the chop and drop method of compost. So when I first started, I was like, okay, I know this is working, so let me develop a system. And I started like kind of collecting all of it, and then later I was like, why am I doing this? And it's not that that's a bad idea. That is a good idea. So if you have
Yeah.
your kitchen scraps, you need a place to put them and let everything break down, and that makes sense. But when you're out in the garden weeding or a plant died, there is no reason to take it to the compost. You just kind of like pull it up and drop it exactly where it was, and that is composting. And so the composting in place, like that plant would have died in this spot and kind of just fed the soil naturally. But banana trees are fantastic, because if you ever want to set up like a guild or a flower bed, I don't know what it is about banana leaves, but they are the most effective mulch that
Gosh.
you
Yes.
lay them down, and they just, if you're really, what you're trying to do is kill grass. If you're creating a flower bed and stuff like that, what you're trying to do is kill grass. The banana leaves completely block out the sun and just kill all the grass, so that then later you can come in with whatever you do want to plant, just scooch over the banana leaves and plant them in that place.
Yeah.
Since you have to cut them down anyways when they finish giving you bananas, those stalks, they're not trunks, whatever they're called, but like
Yeah.
the trunk of this banana tree, if you use them to create barriers for flower beds, now you're
Yes.
like, between the banana leaves and the stalks of the banana plant, you have now created a flower bed out of nothing, out of
Yeah. I was
absolutely
just out
nothing.
of bananas, and then
Yeah,
they're popping up babies, little,
right. At
little
this
pups
point,
everywhere.
yep, and at this point in my gardening experience, I like banana trees more for what they do for the garden than actually for bananas. The bananas are fun, they're good, and I love having them. You can count on them to regularly give, but I love them so much for how sustainable I feel they make the garden. Like, you just compost in place, you use the trunks, and you're done.
And see, I feel that way about moringa, right? So
Mm.
because bananas are a little hard up here, it's not that they
Hmm.
won't grow. Bananas will
Right.
definitely grow up here, but when we get a good frost, it pretty much kills them,
Yeah.
right? And then so
Yeah.
you have banana trees and you can use them for all the benefits that you mentioned. But more likely than not, you're not going to be getting bananas, or you may get them a few years. Like this year, you probably would get them, but maybe next year you won't. But I like moringa because moringa can
Mm.
handle my cold. Moringa is like a killer vitamin, right? I powder it and I put it in like everything we eat. You can't taste it, but
Right.
it has insane amounts of vitamins.
That's
I
what I've
did a
heard.
video.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is crazy. They grow it in countries that have food insecurity,
Hmm.
so that way it is a full force. I mean, it's better than some of the vitamins that you see,
Yeah.
coming across the counter. But the cool thing about it is you can cut it straight to the ground, like right at the bottom, boom,
Right.
and
And
it
it'll
will,
keep coming back.
and yeah, and it will grow to the size of a kind of medium to large size tree. I mean, it gets pretty
Yeah.
big.
Oh, I've seen down here they get really big.
Yeah, they get really big, and you
Yeah.
can chop up all those leaves, like chop up those branches and
Mhm.
lay them down like you do your banana leaves, and
Mhm.
it's a great living mulch because technically I think moringa lives in that legume type family, so it kind of does a fixing of nitrogen and stuff, I think. Don't hold me on that, but I believe so. But it feeds the soil, all the leaves. So you can lay that down and make a complete mulch in your raised bed,
Yeah.
in your guild or in your flower beds or anything. Yeah, I'm geek about soil, like I said.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, I think it's time to start wrapping up.
Okay.
Um, if any viewers have any questions, any comments, please feel free to leave them in the question box below. It might give us topics to talk about on another podcast, and we might be able to answer them for you. So go ahead and let us know if you have any questions. Petrina, before we leave, is there anything that you are promoting this month?
Yes. Okay. So, probably two things. If you are interested, if you're newer to the gardening world, and maybe you're not sure when you're supposed to start things, I do have a free ebook. We'll put it down into the
Mhm.
description, completely free. You just click a link, put your email address, I'll mail it to you. It's an electronic book that has a garden planner, and it talks about, all the different charts, and I base them or segment them into the different seasons. So whatever season you're in, you can just go to that page and see what you can start. And then, for others who really like that one-on-one type connection, I just started doing garden consultations. So I did a few with some of, like, the viewers that I have that I've had like really close relationships with. We've done a few of those now, and I feel like they went so well, and I've been able to watch them improve their garden, and they send me pictures. One lady, so sweet, she sends me pictures because she's got her son, he's really into it.
Mhm.
He's a teenager-ish, almost preteen, and he's doing this video where he's walking around telling me all about his plants. Most adorable thing ever. But the cool
My
thing
daughter
was
grabs my phone and does that all the time.
I
Yeah.
told her your son's gonna become a YouTuber. Like
Yeah.
he's gonna become a garden YouTuber, and he's gonna be great. But just to see how, they were struggling, and then to see these pictures 6 months later where they're just doing incredibly. I mean, one, that just makes my heart happy, right?
It does.
That's
Yeah.
like the whole reason I ever even started this. But if you are the type of person that needs that kind of one-on-one connection, I just started offering the consultations. So I'll give you the link and we can put it down in the description.
That's awesome. So for me this month, I just opened an Amazon storefront. So we've been talking about seed starting, and we've
Yes.
been talking about, if you've been watching the videos, I've redone my patio. So a lot of the items that you've been seeing, either that I've been working with the seeds or just the furniture I have in my patio, are on that storefront. So if you're interested in any of those things, that link will also be down below. So
I'm gonna
with
have to go check that out. I'm gonna go to your
thanks.
store. I'm gonna look at
That
your
sounds
store.
wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to leave all those details in the description box below. If you have any questions, let us know. Subscribe, like. I'll also be leaving all of Petrina's social media information in the description box below. So definitely go and give her a follow, and you can be following all of us Florida gardeners doing awesome things in our gardens. All right. Have a good one.
Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. It was
Have,
really fun chatting with
I
you.
know. I've had a really good time too. All
Yeah.
right. I'll see you soon.
Bye, guys.
Bye.